I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Week 5, idle week, wrapping up the non-conference schedule for the Roadrunners, Greg. We just finished our one media availability
There you go.
this week with Coach Traylor. The Roadrunners are 1-3 after a tough loss to Tennessee. I guess let's start there. We didn't recap the game, but little goes right for the Roadrunners in week 4. No, go ahead. Perfect. Little goes right for the runners in week 4. Fall behind early and just could never dig back from that hole.
Yeah, I think obviously going up against Tennessee, which is maybe one of the best or most talented teams UTSA has faced ever.
You're right.
They're going to be overmatched, and I think you would like to see what UTSA at their peak of the best play they could have had last year or the year before would have looked like against a team like this, because it felt like there were times where, like going in to play Texas last year, that they had the juice to hang with these guys at least
very
for a little
competitive
bit. And I just don't think that that's the form that this team is in right now.
Yeah.
And we can get into all the different reasons as we go through the video here, but I think more than anything against Tennessee especially, the mentality just seemed, I think once after the Army game, Coach Traylor says when we come into Temple, we're going to be 0-0 and have a fresh start.
Yeah.
You're already kind of punted on that game. And I don't know that the preparation through the week or whatever the message was in pregame, it probably wasn't like, hey guys, we don't care about this one. I don't think it was that, but I think it's hard to walk that back all the way. And I think, especially when you're resting some guys and probably taking a look towards the future, you can't go into a game against an SEC team with a mindset like that. And so I think that you saw that in the way the game played out.
Yeah, I think there were a few plays early that kind of led to that feel. I don't know that they didn't play hard, but it just, you're right. Some of the, Frank probably could have played. Frank Harris, quarterback, probably could have played, but didn't. The Roadrunners went through, JT Clark could have played maybe, and
maybe a couple
didn't.
Snaps. Who knows?
So not a full 100% team, but I don't want to say that performance was because of injuries or lack of. I mean, they should have played better. I think from a defensive line that some consider one of the best ever here, they haven't looked great the last 2 weeks. And maybe that's matchups with two really physical teams that you're not going to see. I mean, Army is a matchup that has given UTSA fits every time they've played.
Yeah.
And now you're going up against a pretty physical SEC offensive line. So, I mean, how much of that is, based in reality or kind of just the way the season has played out so far,
Yeah, I'm of two minds about it, because I think there were times against Tennessee, you look at the first play of the game, 80 whatever yard touchdown, and then
just a miss.
Just some different times that Tennessee broke off these explosive runs. The guys running through open field, I was having flashbacks to a previous era of UTSA football where that sort of thing was more common. But then at the same time, I don't think any UTSA fan, no matter how upset they were at different stages of that game, couldn't say there were moments in the third quarter where it was like, wait, is this possible? Could they come back from this? And Rashad Wisdom, it gets lost, but had a pretty clean pick six.
Yeah, I mean, that changes the whole outlook
the gap starts to narrow, and clearly Tennessee was way better than that. Probably would have won that game 99 times out of 100. But I do think that there were still some flashes even within that where it wasn't like every single play and every single moment of the game they were getting off the field. I still think you can find some bright spots.
Well, let's talk about one of those bright spots. Owen McCown comes off the bench in the second half, leads the Roadrunners down the field, 10 for 10 touchdown. Looking pretty sharp out there. Little time to get the ball out. Just UTSA had protection issues all day in that game, but man, he looked good.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the game back probably like 10 or 12 hours ago, so it's still pretty fresh.
Yeah.
And there were some moments that were really impressive.
Right.
To me. I thought his ability to read the pocket, I thought was a much farther, more advanced than what I expected. Like, he really sensed the pressure and knew when and where.
Just get it out,
and when to try to get the ball out. And then there were times that I thought that he went deeper into his progressions than we saw from Eddie Lee in a lot of cases too, where there was one where they tried to set up a screen and it wasn't there, and then Cephas kind of leaked out on like sort of a wheel route kind of looking thing, and he found him down the sideline. And it's funny because he went 18 of 20, and the two that he missed are going to stick with you. Like there was a 3rd and 10 when they were rallying, and he bounced the out route to Cephas, and it was a clean pocket. He's got to make that throw. And then the interception, I have no idea. That was a bizarre play. So it's funny that those are the only 2 incompletions on his day, because otherwise he was very clean and I thought decisive. And it's hard to tell on the TV copy, but it didn't look like he was missing open guys either in terms of like, was there a more explosive play available? He was getting pretty good chunks.
To me, he looked like he started 4 games last year, Colorado. To me, he looked those 4 games he looked like he has that experience. And we talked with Coach Traylor about it. It's one of the silver linings. You could nitpick Eddie Lee's first half against Tennessee, but I think moving forward into the future, the Roadrunners do have a bright spot there at the backup quarterback position to kind of, who knows what it's a transfer portal era. They could go out and get a transfer guy in the offseason, but it does look like, this 1-3 record has yielded at least what you have at the quarterback position moving forward behind Frank.
And I thought Eddie Lee played really well against Army, which is important because certainly that's more like the level of competition that you're going to see on a week-to-week basis.
Right.
So generally, if you're able to perform well in that game, that's probably more of an indicator of what you're going to do in a full season or in conference play compared to your half against Tennessee and how that plays out.
We are getting some traffic here today,
Well, we decided to do it outside because the football team room was in use for other media.
Yeah.
So, it was what you're going to get.
Let's talk big picture here. Roadrunners are 1-3, not the record they feel like they should have. I don't know that it's far off of what I feel like they should have. I think I had them at 2-2. Obviously, that loss to Houston was a close one, and I mean they were upset against Army.
Yeah. Well, so I could go on a whole rant about this, but certainly some people coming into the year
3-1
wanted this team to be not
4-0.
even just 3-1, 12-1
Yeah.
at the end of the season, looking at a Fiesta Bowl spot.
Yeah.
And if that was your expectation, obviously you're going to be pretty disappointed. I'm not sure that was ever totally realistic, but it wasn't outside the realm of possibility. But I think when you assess where they are now and what that means for the rest of the season, I think it's important to think about what are the things that are going wrong and are they sustainable concerns? And so
Can they be fixed?
I was just thinking about it game by game. I mean, the first game against Houston, it was Frank Harris throws 3 interceptions. He's played a million games here. It's happened one other time.
Yeah.
Certainly his offseason injury concerns. He's got to work his way back into form, and especially now with the turf toe, we'll see.
Yeah.
But if you believe that you're going to get close to full strength Frank Harris, you can kind of write that part of that game off. And the other thing was special teams, which if that had been an issue through Jeff Traylor's tenure or even in the other games we've seen this season, I could make that a lingering concern. But I think when those are the 2 biggest things that go wrong, maybe that's not that Houston game probably not the biggest indicator of what's going right or what's going wrong for this team. Texas State, I actually thought probably could have gone either way, really.
Yeah.
And that maybe is discouraging in a lot of ways, but you have to remember in that game, Frank Harris has the injury in the second
John
quarter
Wayne's it up,
and is playing on one foot for the second half, and they still kind of gut it out because the defense had such an outstanding game. And maybe there were some mistakes Texas State made that UTSA can't take full credit for, but generally speaking, I think that game was kind of 50-50, but you understand why UTSA struggled there, and so I don't think that's a long-term concern. And really, when I watched the Army game back, I thought I was going to see a million missed tackles and
bad
Army
tackles,
gutting them and all that stuff, and it really wasn't like that. I mean, there was a ton of plays that Army ran that only went for 2 or 3 yards or were generally considered successful plays for UTSA's defense, and they just couldn't string enough of them together at the right times. When a team goes 6 for 6 on 4th down,
if you stop one of those 4th downs, maybe 2 of those 4th downs, it's a totally different game.
You can say it's like a grit or like triangle of toughness thing, but I think generally at a certain point you're just getting unlucky with that, where you're not able to come up with the critical stops you need when you've shown that you can make them at different stages of the game. And so the thing with the tackling too is we've talked about that in past years where it's been an issue, and I actually think generally compared to the last couple seasons, that might have been an above average tackling.
It's fine.
And that's just the nature of how they play, where you don't always see it with the amount of injuries they get, although I guess on defense they've been pretty healthy this year, but they don't tackle during practice, and that's part of the reason is they want to keep guys fresh and healthy for when the actual season is happening and the games that matter. And so I feel like you can honestly write off that game. It depends how big you are into the metrics, but they had an 85% post-game win probability, and I think if you play that game 8 to 10 times, that they win 8 to 10 of them. I just think they were better than Army, and so maybe that's just unlucky. And we talked about Tennessee and how the extent to which that maybe the mentality was wrong, or that's just a tough opponent. And so the thing about that all, just kind of wrapping that up, is then when you look at what they're going up against, the teams that they're going to play in this league are not that strong initially.
Yeah, they're far at a lower level than what they faced.
The first 7 teams on the conference schedule out of 8 all rank lower than the 4 teams they've played so far. Even Texas State ranks ahead of some of those teams if you look at like the advanced metrics. And so I think that they're going to be a touchdown to 2 touchdown favorite in all of these games. And that's in the form they're in now.
Right.
I think there's room for them to improve. So it's hard to pick anybody to win 7 games in a row, but if they were to rip off 7 games in a row, I wouldn't be shocked. I think that they're probably the demise of the team so far has been probably a little bit overstated, and I think that there's a lot of room for them to iron up a couple of different things. If it's, when we talked to Jeff today, biggest issues that seem to be coming to the forefront are the offensive line, which maybe some injuries will
some depth
shore that up, or just experience for the guys who haven't played, like a Luca Perez or Ernesto Alvarez out at right tackle, and just improved play there. Walker Beatty is still very much a developmental player too. So there's a lot of reasons.
Buffalo Cruz was tabbed as one of the starters in the preseason, and 4 games in, we haven't seen anything from him.
I think maybe Walker Beatty's play hasn't been great, and I think the shuffling certainly hasn't helped matters. And so if you think about what this offensive line looks like with Buffalo Cruz potentially at left tackle, it's easy to say we've never seen him play at this level. But presumably, with how he was talked up during the preseason, that could be an upgrade. And then Mekhi Hart back at right tackle, and that allows you to put Ernesto back at center, and I think you have a pretty solid group at that point. So that's one of your big issues, hopefully checked off. And the run defense the last couple of weeks, like we just talked about, I really don't think against Army it was as bad as it was made out to be. And I think that unit actually in a lot of ways looks better than what we've seen the last couple of years. That being said, the first 2 games were clearly better than the 2 more recent games, but I think if you take what we think about this defense, presuming it's somewhere in the middle, that's still better than the last couple of years. And there's no reason the offense should be performing at such a lower level. Like, sure, they lost Zachary Franklin, but if they have JT out there, which presumably they will to some extent the rest of the season, it's just, that's like a missing component when you think about how much that they've gone to Josh Cephas and the percentage of the targets that have gone to him. I think that's something that's needed to open up their offense. So unless you think that JT's going to come back in some really diminished form and you think Frank Harris will never be close to what he was before, you should believe that this offense can get back to a high level. And so there's no reason that this team can't perform the way we've seen the last couple of years.
Just to wrap up the non-conference, important to note, no FCS team this season. Most seasons you play 1 FCS team, 1 Power 5, and then 2 kind of teams from your schedule. And a lot of that was Houston was, they moved to the Big 12, and that schedule was made before this. So
it was like an Army game that got kicked down the road because of a conflict with something else. I can't remember
then
how
COVID happened with some stuff moved around there. So not that's an excuse, but most teams don't play 2 Power 5 teams in one season.
And if people want to say that Jeff Traylor's making excuses, I understand that. But I do appreciate that he takes the time to explain to us their perspective on things, and I think that sometimes you're going to hear it and say, I don't buy that. But I buy the idea that playing Army sucks. Like, I get that. I do think that Houston and Texas State were very much up for those games. I believe that Army hid some things on offense, and that led to some of the challenges that we saw on the defensive end, which, again, for the 5th time, really wasn't that bad, even with that barrier in place. And then that Tennessee's just a tough opponent. And so I think that, you can call it excuses if you want, but generally I think that the 1-3 start is pretty explainable. And I just don't know how much of it is a long-term concern, unless you really think that they're just not going to get any better.
No SFA, no Texas Southern. That probably doesn't change anything except one more win. The team's probably going to look a lot the same. So just something to note, I guess, from the non-conference.
One of the things I find funny is, like, I try to keep up with a decent amount of the social media chatter just to see what people might want us to ask about or what sort of things they're concerned about.
What's going on, what's saying.
And it's crazy because it's all over the place. Like, you guys can't even agree on what you think they're not doing well. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, you pull up the bingo card of, like, everybody's going to say play calling. Generally, I don't know that it's been that much different from what it's the Jeff Traylor offense. It's a lot of the same parts. And I think that you see it. It's just impossible to know. They've essentially played 4 different quarterbacks because I count one-footed Frank Harris
as a different good guy.
So you haven't even seen, like, if you wanted to look at different trends, I think it would be hard to say what parts of the field they're targeting or what types of plays they're running because there's such a small sample size with each different guy. And so I have a hard time making that a big point of concern at this point. Defensive coordinator stuff, again, it's been 2 games where they were good, and it's like, if you think the defensive coordinator does a bad job against Army, well, good news, you're never going to face that again.
Unless they join the league, then you're going to face it every other year.
But I mean, for the rest of the season, in terms of how you project out this team's performance. So I don't buy those concerns either. And, then you get into the same stuff of, like, are they focused and locked in and toughness and things that are hard to rate. And I think it's just a matter of, or even like penalties. UTSA's one of the 20 least penalized teams.
This time last year, they were one of the most penalized teams last year.
But because they're losing, it's a complaint.
Yeah.
Whereas when they're winning, you look the other way. So I think like just the 1-3 record tints the way a lot of people view stuff about this team, and maybe there are certainly room to complain about different pre-snap, like a couple false starts, a couple having to burn timeouts, especially against Tennessee, the defense like getting those shifts in and not having too many guys on the field.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think people forget, because the last 2 seasons were so strong, is that they had a lot of these issues last year.
Yeah. And
the reason that if it becomes much more glaring, we'll have to make it a talking point, but I already know what Jeff's going to say because we asked him the questions last year. It's if they were to run their base stuff and keep the offense extremely simple, then they could run a clean game and not have any of those infractions. But the reality is they rotate a ton of guys.
Yeah.
And especially on the offensive side, you see the amount of different formations and packages that they line up with and the amount of pre-snap motions, especially with the shuffle at quarterback and the amount of checks that they make at the line. You're going to get some of that. And it's not like it's been glaring or egregious or cost them many games in particular that I would point to. I think it's just been a matter of just kind of ironing some of that out early in the season, which is not unfamiliar with what we've seen in these super successful conference championship seasons. But because they're losing, these are the things that become complaint points, whereas I don't think it's any different from what we've seen before.
Let's talk offense. The lack of production on the offense has been a big talking point early in the season. A new offensive coordinator under Justin Berg taking over for Will Stein. Frank Harris has been kind of banged up. Maybe we saw a quarter and a half of him look somewhat normal. To me, I don't know that the Roadrunners have the same horses that they've had the last 2 seasons, especially at wide receiver, with all due respect to the guys that are here. I mean, you look at who are the top 2 wide receivers right now, and who were the top 2 wide receivers last season. So it's a different mix. The JT Clark situation is obviously concerning, right? Like Coach Traylor said today, he didn't say he was gonna be on the snap count next week, but it sounded like he's gonna be on the snap count.
He says different stuff, different places. I listened to all the radio interviews yesterday, and one of them he said 20 to 25 snaps.
Right.
So I would believe that that's pretty reasonable.
But don't tell Temple that. So. It looks like they're targeting him to, slowly make his way back. How does he look once he's back? Coach Traylor said today Frank Harris is probably not going to be 100% the rest of the season.
The rest of his life, most likely. I mean, just the amount of things that guy's been through.
So what's the high end? What's the ceiling on this offense? You can't expect the same record-breaking performances you've had the last 2 seasons. It's just a different team, I think.
Well, I do think to some extent, you look at the last 2 years, averaging 37 points a game.
Yeah.
Coming into the season, I said, I think they could be at that level.
Yeah.
Because you're really just losing Zakari.
Yeah.
But the way it worked out, I think especially the first game, the rust on Frank Harris was the biggest difference maker.
Yeah.
But
quarterback
also,
play. That's the biggest difference every week in college football.
For sure, at any level of football, honestly. And then I think especially, really, I think JT, you just hate to pin it all on injuries because it's just an easy excuse, but I do believe that JT changes the shape of the offense, just the way that he stretches the field.
It changes where you put Cephas.
Right.
And that changes that whole unit.
Or just the amount of attention that defenses can pay to Cephas, because, maybe we've seen some flashes from Willie McCoy or Tykeal Kellogg or Chris Carpenter when they've been in there, but the reality is they just haven't been as productive at as high of a level as the 3 guys they had last year.
And I don't think you could ask those guys to be the guys from last year because they've been in this offense for so long and they kind of apex to that moment, I feel like.
So I just think if JT is back, it opens up a lot of different things.
Right.
I just feel like it's hard to quantify or explain, but it just feels like watching the games that they're just missing that one explosive weapon that stretches the field or creates a different threat that people have to be worried about. It feels like they're just easier to defend right now because that guy's not out there and because you don't have to treat the other guys on that offensive receiver group the same way. And if you want to go position by position, if anything, the running backs are better than we've seen here.
Yeah.
I mean, this group's outstanding.
Right.
They have 3 guys who can really play, and I don't know that there's a way to integrate maybe 2 of them at a time to overcome that receiver. I mean, you hand the ball off to one guy. It's hard to really leverage that the way you would want to. But I think that group is strong. The offensive line, for as much as we've talked about it, it's better than it was last year when it was a mess.
Yeah.
And they really had to change the offense completely to work around that. So those 2 positions you have to feel at least decent about. Tight end, I don't know if maybe something's missing with Oscar Cardenas. It felt like he hasn't necessarily been the same player we've seen.
Maybe some depth there. I mean...
Yeah, Dan Dishman's injury hurts a little bit. We've seen Houston Thomas perform
okay.
fine.
Yeah.
Nothing really stand out. But I just think that when you talk about the quarterback play and the receivers, you're just missing those guys being able to play at the top level. And at least we know at quarterback, if Frank can't come back, that there are some promising options there with Owen and Eddie Lee. But generally speaking, JT is going to be hard to replace if he's not back at top form.
Yeah, the pass game gets all the attention, but to me, what's the most exciting thing moving forward is that run game, because you're right. Robert Henry, who's a guy that's almost been a little bit forgotten in the lead up to the season. I mean, he looks
awesome.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised to see him start.
Yeah, he looks like he could be the best guy.
Which is
out
no
of the group.
disrespect to Kavorian Barnes, who, aside from the fumbles, has had a strong season. He looks like he's good running the ball.
I mean,
Robert Henry just looks really, really
up
dynamic.
until last week, they were averaging 4.4 yards a carry. That was like 0.2 yards off the number one in the. So moving forward, I think that group has the ability to carry the offense, especially when you talk about potentially getting a starter back at left tackle or at least depth.
Right.
And then being able to, I mean, is Ernesto Alvarez really a Division I tackle? We've seen him play that, but when he got here...
Or is Walker Beatty?
Yeah, exactly. He was a defensive lineman this time last year.
Do you have concerns about the play calling part of it? I know that's been a talking point for some, and I kind of shot it down, but I don't know how you feel.
I mean, it feels like there's more screens and less vertical stuff, but I feel like that's maybe a function of the play of the offensive line and pass protection, maybe. I mean, it seems okay. I mean, the production issue is obvious. You know, I don't know that they're great in red zone. And then, scoring points is the biggest stat, and they're not great there.
One thing I will say, for all the excuses I've made and kind of it's going to get better, I feel like the blocking on the perimeter from the receivers and the tight ends has been way worse than we've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I don't know, they just haven't held up as well, I don't think. Yeah. And I think when you see a lot of plays that either it's a screen pass that isn't very productive, or it's a play that breaks to the perimeter but doesn't turn into an explosive gain, I think a lot of it is that those guys are not making the same level of blocks and creating the same kind of issues for defenders that they have in the past. And it was especially glaring against Tennessee, where you expect to see it. But even in some of these other games, they're just not, creating that kind of movement. And you saw it, what was it against? Was it against Army, I think, that Josh Cephas caught the screen pass and went for the 45-yard touchdown? It was like, it stood out because they just haven't made those kind of blocks on the perimeter more often than not this season.
Let's jump to the defense. I looked up this stat yesterday. I don't know that there's been a holding call against the defense.
Okay, you mean like by the offense?
Yeah. Yeah, so some of that is... I think there's been some missed calls, especially in that Army game.
And that's, I don't... Again, it's like a really easy excuse to say, oh, the refs, whatever. But I think when you're Army's offense and the way that they play, one holding call ends a drive.
Exactly.
Because they gain 3 or 4 yards at a time.
Yeah, they're not getting a 15-yard.
So if it's against Tennessee and you say they missed some holding calls, I don't want to hear it. But against Army, I'll hear you out on that. I think that's a valid concern because it would have been a game changer.
So, but you can't place all of that on the referees.
Right.
Certainly you have a 4-game sample.
Well, 2 of those games are good, though.
Yeah. But they still haven't created a turnover.
Yeah, that one's interesting.
And, this is a deep unit in the front 7. You have some of your best players in the front 7. Is there any doubt that unit's going to shape into form once conference play starts?
I think we've seen the last couple of years, in my opinion, I guess anybody could have their own take on this. I think the biggest weakness for UTSA's defense has generally been the pass coverage.
Right, the secondary.
Because as much as you think about some of those secondary guys and what their strengths were, it seemed like, a guy like Rashad Wisdom is a lot more comfortable playing downhill and making tackles against the run game, it feels like, compared to what he does as a coverage safety going for interceptions. And I think that was the same, for Kalechi. That was the same kind of deal. That's just the type of player he is. And I think that area is actually, I think, a lot stronger. I really feel good about this cornerbacks group. And Jeff said Cyrus Dumas might come back, and we haven't seen Zay Frazier play.
Yeah.
And even without those guys, Cam Alexander's been awesome, I think.
Ken Robinson's been out at the safety position last week.
And Nick Troy Fortune, we know what he can do. Even in some of the plays they got beat on against Tennessee, I thought the coverage was pretty decent. And that's been the case all year, where it hasn't really felt like guys are running free through the secondary, which we've seen in the past. So right at the start, I feel good about that group. And then I think the front 7's been pretty promising in terms of at least their ability to generate pressure on quarterbacks. And I think those are the things that would usually lead to turnovers. So it's more kind of baffling to me that they haven't been able to generate that. I would think that all the ingredients are in place for that to come through at a higher level than it has, and it just hasn't connected to this point. So generally, we saw the same thing last year. It was not turnovers overall because they had some fumbles that they created last season early in the year, but it was the interception component that I think it took a while to get going. Maybe they had So if you take out the Texas Southern game, the first 6 games or something like that, they didn't have any.
Yeah.
And then the last year the last half of the year, they had multiple interceptions in more than half of the games. And I just think that we're going to see probably a similar trend this year, where I think they really start getting going in the turnover generation just by the law of averages.
1 turnover for the Roadrunners, a muffed punt or a blocked punt.
Yeah, I don't know how that one gets scored. I don't know if
it's a turnover. I think it's a fumble recovery in the stats.
So 1 for the okay.
Yeah. Just overall, the defense. I mean, can they kick it up in this conference portion? It feels like they have the depth to me at defensive line, and the linebackers are playing well enough. I mean, is Trey Morgan to stay healthy? We saw him come back from an ankle injury. He certainly was having a huge season before. He still is on pace for a record-breaking season. So it feels like the pieces are there for them to be the dominant team that they looked like they were going to be, dominant unit they looked like they were going to be early in the season.
Well, I would say, what do you think is more reflective of what the rest of the year is going to look like? Houston's offense and Texas State's offense, or Army's offense and Tennessee's offense?
Right.
You're not going to face what Army does or the Tennessee talent.
Yeah.
It probably will look more like the kind of success that they had the first 2 weeks of the year, if I had to guess.
Right.
Now, maybe we'll find out that Texas State's offense isn't all it's cracked up to be, although they look pretty good, and Houston looks like they might be in for a rough year. So perhaps we could look back at those things differently, and it's not as glowing of a review for the defense as we thought it was at the time. But generally, I think that, the defense hasn't been the strength of this team the last couple of years.
Right.
If we're just talking about what does it take to perform at the level they've performed at previously, I think the group's defensively is probably already there with the potential to be a step ahead.
Yeah. What's your take on, I guess, how we've seen Jeff Traylor this first month of the season? Obviously, he's not accustomed to this much losing.
Right.
I think he said he's never been 1-3 in his career, and at times it seems a little bit frustrated in some of the post game comments. But I mean, is that just the heat of the moment stuff, or is there anything to take away from that?
I just want to go on the record that I enjoy that. I mean, I think that, especially the one after the Tennessee game, when I say, are there things that you feel like you need to clean up, or do you feel pretty good about the team overall? And he kind of snaps back like everything's fine.
Right.
Maybe it's not the best soundbite or the best quote, but I think it's pretty telling that they generally feel like the issues are small and correctable rather than big, and we need to go back and make. So as long as I get an answer, I'm fine with it. And if the emotion comes through, I like that part too. Sometimes it'll be in a more expressive way, and sometimes it won't. But I'm glad that he allows himself to be emotional in interviews at times. So generally, I like that part of it. And in terms of your bigger picture question, the amount of times that I've just been brainstorming UTSA angles, and I've always wondered how Jeff Traylor's entire tenure would be different if in the very first game he coached here, the Texas State kicker made the extra point.
Yeah.
And because if you lose that game, all this stuff about the culture and the buy-in and the momentum that they created right out of the bat, it just could be different.
Yeah.
And maybe he's a good enough coach and they're a talented enough roster that they would have had the same record with 1 fewer win. But generally, I think a lot of it was about this culture and just the atmosphere on the team that became very positive and created a lot of that positive momentum for them. And so I really do wonder what it's like when you're 1-3.
Yeah.
I think being able to fall back on the bonds within the group, because they've all played together for so long, is important and helps push through that. And I think being able to look back on, listen, we've won back-to-back conference championships, so what we're doing works. There's no reason for you guys to feel like we need to make some drastic change or to get so down on yourselves just because of these setbacks that they've seen. And especially when, as cliche as it is, their goals are still in front of them.
Yeah.
And I think that they probably, if you lose the first conference game, let's see. I mean, imagine if they go to Temple and then they're 1-4. Then I want to see what it looks like around here. But I think until then, especially with the narrative that started after Army of let's just be ready for Temple.
Yeah. Well, then let's
when
see.
you set your sights on
ready.
that, if you can still hit that mark, then I think you can keep your chin up for that time. And if you don't, then that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. To me, what's most concerning is not, what's said or emotions or whatever. It's just some of the play, the last 2 weeks especially. And Coach Traylor said today that they feel like they're real close to getting some of that stuff corrected. And in the trenches, I feel like there's...
Is that the area you're most alarmed by, or what do you think?
I'm worried about the defensive line. I had concerns about the offensive line coming into the season, and then you shuffle 2 weeks in or 2.5 weeks in. So, to me, the long-term approach to correcting that group I do think some of that's correctable, so we'll see. It does feel like the best football is ahead for the Roadrunners. I don't know that Conference USA, the American Conference has looked super strong so far this season.
Yeah, and you look at the first few games they play. Temple, nobody thought much from them, and they haven't shown a lot.
Yeah.
UAB, maybe saw some promising signs against Georgia, but there were a couple weeks in the season where
Tulane lost their
this
quarterback.
is a disaster.
Yeah.
FAU is the one after that, and they're on their second quarterback, although I guess they played pretty well against Illinois. They kept up to one score, so maybe there's something there, especially going on the road. But generally, I don't think being on your number 2 quarterback already is a great sign for them. And then East Carolina started 0-3 for the first time in however long, many years, I think. And they probably have one of their weaker teams. And North Texas, I know there were some pretty panicked vibes coming out of them early in the season, too, based on how things look under a new coaching staff. So that's your first 5 games, and then you get into Rice and USF, and
Rice looks a little tougher.
If you think that those teams are significantly better because USF hung with Alabama and Rice beat Houston, maybe, but you're kind of hoping by then the UTSA looks a lot different than they look now.
Right.
If I just looked at those first 5 and I said, all these are pretty winnable. Mm-hmm. And so you got to figure at least 4-1, if not 5-0. And that's presuming this current level of performance. I mean, if they get to the level we think they can be at, then I think they should be able to win all those games.
And we'll see.
Now, in terms of the goals are all still in front of us thing, there's a little bit of a gap right now between UTSA and your Tulane and your SMU and even your Memphis have all looked really strong early in the season. UTSA doesn't seem to be quite at that level at this moment, so they need to take a step up to be ready for those challenges. But the point I'm trying to make is I think they have time to build into the season. Yeah. Not just with the well-timed open week, but with some of the weaker teams that they play right out of the gate.
A suboptimal September, some big opportunities in October to set up for a November. There's still, you got the Tulane game at the end after Thanksgiving.
The reality is, if you wanted UTSA to go and play in the New Year's Six game, once they lost to Houston, that was basically done. So after that, it's whatever happens against. You want to win Texas State,
right? Obviously,
game. But whatever happens against Army, whatever happens against Tennessee, doesn't really change. Maybe into a slightly better bowl game if you beat Army, or and if you beat Tennessee, that would be monumental in a lot of ways. But that's not expected either way. So that's like almost not even worth discussing. So at that point, would the Army game have made a huge difference in where your bowl season is going to end up? There's a lot that goes into that anyway. And so I think that generally speaking, coming through non-conference 1-3 doesn't have to be the end of the world when you can find areas that seem correctable and maybe the performance isn't as bad as people feel like it is right now, and you have some beatable teams on the schedule. I'm relatively optimistic about this team and where they're headed, especially considering what I've seen from everybody else out there.
Greg Luca, folks, not the end of the world. Be sure to find him on social media. Greg, I think we're at 33 minutes here.
Yeah, hope you guys stick around. I know there was you don't have a game this weekend, so you got like 3 extra hours to watch.
So we're going in. I think we've hit on everything. Like I said on Saturday, I think the best football is ahead of this team, and brighter days are ahead, I think.
Student athletic fee?
Oh yeah, big moment coming up in a few weeks for the Roadrunners. A chance to increase. I saw you doing the math. I'm not as good as math that you are.
It could be a big difference.
12 hours. They're trying to raise the fee at $1.50 every year for 5 years.
Right.
That would increase the budget significantly for the Roadrunners. Something that they want to do. I think when Taylor Amy was telling us, president of the school, a few months ago, that they want to kick up the budget a few $1 million overnight. I think this is kind of what he had.
It makes it $5 million. So think ballpark $40 million is what they operate at right now.
Yeah.
At current enrollment, at the end of the 5-year period, it's like $5 million more.
Right.
And if they hit the enrollment targets for the end of that 5-year period, it's like $12 million. Like it's a lot more money than they're bringing in right now.
Yeah, I think somebody told me if it passes, they may get close to $1 million next semester.
Right.
So you look at this building's $40 million. They're still paying it on a loan. Some huge needs around here.
2 years worth of that covers an indoor practice facility.
Yes.
Or at least the covered part, not a proper indoor.
Right.
But who knows if this passes, if maybe they start changing the benchmarks on that.
Yeah.
It's all speculation, but I think that generally speaking, it would be very positive. Now, I know you are into the social media part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you seen positive reactions, negative reactions? Do you think this will get through to students, or what?
It's hard to say. I don't know how much I see of the student reaction.
Okay.
So let's be clear. This is a student vote.
Right.
So it's the students.
It's easy for people who don't have to pay the money.
To say, let's do it. Let's for it. So I want to say it's about 50-50 from the limited sample size I've seen. They announced this thing last week, I think a week from Thursday or something like that. And the votes on homecoming, it'll be interesting to see what the turnout looks like. They had this vote in 2018, like the first month after Lisa Campos got here. It wasn't, pushed as much.
Right.
And it failed overwhelmingly, I think. Before that, in 2007, maybe?
It was a long time, yeah.
Yeah, that was actually voted to pass, and that's what created the football program here. So, I mean, you look around, I think Lisa Campos said it was put UTSA about middle of the road in the American. It's hard to know.
They're kind of middle-ish right now, but it's a different benchmark because they are not as established as a lot of the other programs.
Right, yeah.
Like Charlotte, for instance, draws hugely on their student fees and
right.
has a lot more because they're about the same age as UTSA, and generally at that stage of a program's development,
you need it more.
You need to lean on that more than when you're able to have this huge season ticket base, donor base, alumni base, all these different things. So generally, I think in terms of emerging programs, as they call it, UTSA is probably middle of the pack, or this would put them middle of the pack. And it's just a matter. It's interesting how they do it. I think this is probably how anybody does it. But the people who are voting on it now are not going to have to pay the full.
Right. Yeah, you're going to get out of here in a year, in 2 years. Yeah.
Anyway,
I think the total difference is like $300 or $400.
It was something like $440 for a full-time student for a year right now.
Right now, yeah.
Versus like $680 maybe.
Yeah.
It's in the article, but it's something like that.
Lots of math. I'm not great at math, but I mean, to me, it seems like it's worth it. One thing I probably want to research before the vote, I think it's homecoming weekend, which is also Hall of Fame weekend for the athletic. The big push to get the students to vote. So I'd be interested to see where that stands among the Texas schools. And obviously, you got some blue blood programs in there, so there's going to be a little bit higher. But
I mean, or lower if they don't need them in the same way.
And it's like you come to UTSA, right? And what are your options? Like, what's Texas State? What's Rice? Baylor? Some of those other Houston. What do those schools pay?
Right.
So that's something I'd be interested to see where the Roaders would stack up in that fee.
The interesting thing about the 2018 one, this is like a random aside, but apparently part of that was removing the 12-hour cap on how many hours you'd have to pay the athletic fee associated with, and I think that keeping that cap is important.
Yeah, a lot of people take more than 12 hours.
There's no reason that was sort of a weird way to go about it, and I don't know how much that played into the bottom line versus there just wasn't a lot of momentum around athletics at that time.
I think there was also like a bus fee or transportation fee.
Yeah,
that wasn't
I don't know if it was
very
tied
popular.
in or you were just voting for both of them at once, and it's easy to check the no box twice. But generally speaking, I feel like 1 and 3 start aside, the momentum around the program right now is a lot more positive than it was then, and I think there's a lot of reasons to believe people would be more willing to participate in something like that.
Yep. I'm of the opinion you want a big, strong athletic program, you gotta pay for it, and it's important to note that it's only going to represent like 30%, 35% of the overall budget. So there's still other external factors.
One of the interesting ways to think about it in terms of is it warranted is to really put into perspective that the last time it went up was in 2007?
Yeah.
Has anything changed since 2007?
A lot. Yeah.
Do you think that maybe they might need a little bit more than they did in 2007?
Just inflation alone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Even just the inflation side of it would be enough, but the program is in such a different place. So the idea that what they're asking for you would be commensurate with what they're giving you, I think, is in line.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I think that'll wrap it up. Any last words to the fans? Appreciate your coverage in Knoxville. I wasn't able to make it. I think you did a great job, even though they didn't let you on the field.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
It's big-time football
over there. So, Roadrunners 1-3. The sky is not falling, I don't think.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, so we'll see how the month of October treats UTSA. That'll wrap it up. JJ Perez, Greg Luca, and Inside Runner Sports Express News. Thanks for watching, guys.